started talking already, but I'm going to go ahead and record this, and we will send all of you all who are here a copy of this recording. And the recording will also go up on the OCAHS website. So you're welcome to watch it there after the program. But I want to start our program today with a little introduction of our panelists. This year's theme for Juneteenth is celebrating stories of freedom. And we really wanted to capture this idea of not just Juneteenth as one day over in Texas, but how freedom is worked for and celebrated all over the country and through generations. So each week we're going to be talking about different ways we see freedom. And for today, we're talking about stories from our land. So our panelists today include Michael Carter Jr., who's also a member of the Orange County African American Historical Society's board. He's an 11th generation American and farmer, and his 5th generation to farm on Carter Farms, his family's Century Farm in Orange County, Virginia, where he gives workshops on how to grow and market ethnic vegetables. With Virginia State University, he's the Small Farm Resource Center coordinator for the Small Farm Outreach Program, the Virginia Association of Biological Farmers, and the Virginia Food Shed Capital have set them on their respective boards of directors. He also serves as the state coordinator for the Black Church Food Security Network and the food safety coordinator for the 6th State Farm to Table organization. He has acquired an agricultural economics degree from North Carolina A&T State University and worked in Ghana, Kenya, and Israel as an agronomist and organic agricultural consultant. He's a climametrician, curriculum developer, and program coordinator for his educational, cultural, and vocational platforms. Ken Essem, I'm not sure if I said that right, but Michael, please correct me, and Afroculture. He teaches and expounds on the contributions of Africans and African Americans to agriculture worldwide and trains students, educators, and professionals in African cultural understanding, empathy, and implicit bias recognition. Michael, we're so excited to have you here today. Rebecca Davis is our second panelist. Rebecca Davis is a PhD candidate from UC Santa Cruz and has formerly been an archaeology technician at Montpelier. After 2 years working with the archaeology department, she recently accepted a position as the oral history officer working with the Montpelier Descendants Committee and the Montpelier Foundation to assist with the efforts of memorialization. Her research goal is to understand how African Americans who were enslaved or worked on the landscape could navigate and intentionally create space and place. If Montpelier's space is the warp, the scale, size, and design used to enforce the rigid system of economy, power, and control is the place, is the wealth of human experiences and actions. The development of surveillance strategies and meaning making and the threads of daily life combined in this frame, but creatively woven through practice and resolve. Her new role as the oral history officer is to help incorporate these critical historical accounts, both pre and post emancipation, into a broader narrative of the Montpelier landscape. Our final panelist is Dr. Matthew Reeves. Matt has been the director of archaeology at James Madison's Montpelier since the year 2000, and he leads the overall archaeological research at Montpelier. Dr. Reeves is the principal investigator for all the archaeological projects on the property, and over the past 2 decades, his research is focused on plantation life, Civil War encampments, and the overall focus on sites of the African diaspora, both pre and post-emancipation. Prior to coming to Montpelier, he directed projects at Manassas National Battlefield, Jefferson Patterson Park, and various New York Department of Transportation projects, and has worked on a wide variety of historic and pre-contact sites in Maryland, Virginia, New York, and Jamaica. His doctorate is from Syracuse University and focused on 19th century settlements of the enslaved in Jamaica, and has spent 2 years surveying and excavating there. So we have an amazing panel. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We're so excited for this conversation and to go ahead and get it started. And just for our audience members, again, feel free to use the chat. And at the end of the program, we're going to have some time built in for questions, which you'll be able to ask via chat or by raising your hand, and we'll call on you. So I wanted to start off today talking a little bit about this year's theme for our Juneteenth celebration, which is celebrating stories of freedom. So a lot of times people don't necessarily associate land or landscape with that idea of either stories or storytelling, or even with the idea of freedom. So how does the land keep and share stories? And I will go to whoever wants to go first, or I will pick one of you. Matt, I saw you move, so, or Becca, you unmuted yourself first. Go ahead.
I'll go. Well, for me, this is a really interesting question because it's something I think about a lot. I think it's symmetrical. I think it's reflective. We shape the landscape, but the landscape also shapes us, our daily lives. So if we think about kind of areas of refuge, why we go there, the kind of feelings that those spaces might evoke, I mean, that leaves a serious imprint on us, which could mean that, you know, you go back there often, you repeatedly, you take care of the space, you know, that kind of thing. So in that way, I think that symmetrical nature makes landscapes of freedom, embeds that meaning.
Excellent, thank you. Matt, I'll go to you next. How does the land keep and share stories?
I'm going to follow what Becca was saying and add to that, you know, our archaeological perspective. Which, what else would we do? Is the sites, and this is really wonderfully illustrated in areas that have been preserved, you know, either most of the time, you know, unintentionally, like the shot I've got in my background here is a shot in the East Woods of Montpelier. And what these sites preserve is their stories through the just like Becca was saying, people go to a place for refuge and go there often and create patterns of behavior that we archaeologists can find and interpret. And one of the things that really brings these stories out is the connections with descendants, and having those stories reflect descendants' oral histories, descendants' views on their own family history. And you know, the one way that these stories have really been remarkably preserved is no one expected the land to have these stories in them. So fortunately, like, you know, after and during emancipation, so many of these sites were abandoned because of the change, you know, massive change of people moving across areas and whole economic systems being disrupted. And many of these sites were abandoned, and no one thought that these lands would tell these stories from the archaeology. And so many documents were destroyed, deeds were destroyed to impair those stories. People were muted, but the land has these stories to tell. And later on, I'll talk about some of the examples with trees and other things that are out there that can speak.
Thank you. Michael, same question.
Very good. I'm sorry, I thought I was interrupting you. I'm sorry. Well, you know, and very much I'm gonna preempt Matt and talk about a little bit about the plants that I see, taken from an agricultural perspective. They tell a lot of the story of resistance and adaptation, the plants and the land especially. And there's several examples that I see this in my farm. One of those is horse nettle. Horse nettle is a common weed on a lot of people's farms in this area and in the state. But in Ghana, West Africa, there's a plant that looks very similar to horse nettle called boma, G-B-O-M-A. Boma is an edible nightshade plant where you eat the leaves of the nightshade as well as the fruits, like an eggplant. And you look at horse nettle doesn't have, I would dare say horse nettle leaves are probably poisonous, but they still produce the same fruit and look almost exactly identical. And on my farm, as I give my tours, I call them GMAs, genetically modified African plants. And it's very much similar to the adaptations to me that the Africa had to make in America. That initially we were these very, you know, edible, we understood how to live in that environment in Africa and was peaceful and harmonious. And when we came to a more aggressive and more dangerous habitat for our survival, we morphed into different, we had to develop thorns. We had to develop certain nuances about ourselves to allow us to survive this environment, whether it be the cold weather, whether it be the onslaught of racism and anti-Blackness, whether it be just the idea that we're poisonous, that we're harmful, that our presence needs to be eradicated from this place. And there are plenty of examples like that within the agricultural landscape that to me kind of very much relates to the our realities as Africans in America, very much like many of the African plants in America that's had to adjust and adapt and also be labeled as weeds, be labeled as invasive species, be labeled as, you know, troublesome. You can't eat that, you know, those are dangerous. And it's almost, you know, identically reality. The more these plants were discovered, a lot of times, more times they were told not to touch them, not to be associated with them. Very much like you had Eastern European immigrants coming here, and African immigrants coming here, and Asian immigrants coming here, and everyone saying, don't touch those communities, don't go near those communities, don't go near those people. They're poisonous, they're dangerous, they're not edible, they have thorns, they're pricky. So I've seen a lot with the landscape there, that the land and the landscape tells a story if you can discern what it's showing you. And I think that discernment comes through this time experience and really being in tune with the nature itself and being around other places in which these things were native. Like I said, there's numerous examples of amaranth, with Pudica mimosa, which is like the sensitive plant, and various other plant species that are very much have adapted here and taken on a different form just to survive, very much like the African in America.
Excellent, thank you. Well, I'm gonna volley back to Matt. You teased us with some thoughts on trees. And since Michael brought in plants, let's go to talk about some trees. How do they fit into this conversation of keeping stories and demonstrations of freedom on the landscape?
Yeah, today I was just looking at some tree lines along the edge of the burial ground at Montpelier. And I realized that there's one tree line that extends for 3,600 feet, you know, from what potentially is the entrance of the burial ground all the way to the formal garden. And the landscapes of these plantation landscapes that we study are all formed and built by Black people. Black people knew the soils, they knew you know, what sort of plants grew where. They planted the trees that were and allowed other trees that were grown up along the field edge to prosper, and cut some down, used some for probably you know, household uses. They knew where things were, and a lot of times these trees survive. There are these ancient trees that grow up, and if they grew along the edge of a field, they in the middle, you know, along a fence line like the one I was looking at today that goes through a field, they stretch out in all directions. If they grew up along a wood line in a field, they stretch towards the field. If they're in the middle of the woods and you have a tree that's growing up straight and massive in the middle of the woods, you knew it was a dividing line between two fields. And so when you see these trees are witnesses to the you know, the period of when this land was being worked, you know, in such a large way, anywhere in Virginia, anywhere in the South, you know, these are hold the stories of the people that form these fields. And, you know, you might think about this, you know, well, it's about, you know, if they were being forced to work, isn't that about, you know, enslavement? But in that, the farmers, the enslaved farmers, had the knowledge that allowed the wealth to be generated. And that was power, one of the few forces of power they would have over, you know, making or breaking the economy. And this allowed negotiation of role. And then afterwards, this, in many cases, like in Orange County, that relationship brought so many people back to Orange. I mean, there's always, you know, the family stories and talking with families in this area where, you know, great-great-grandpa came on a train, and, you know, 1870s, and why coming back here? You know, probably because sold in the 1840s, 1850s, and coming back to a land that they formed. So, and so yeah, that's what I was thinking about with trees. So
No, that's great. I think this is a really amazing connection, as what you're saying and what Michael's saying is that the land and the landscape has these stories, and we just have to be able to decipher them. So whether it's looking at the plants themselves and their qualities, whether they're thorns or not, their origin, how they've grown and how they've shaped trees, plants, the land itself, it's telling us about the past. We just have to know how to speak its language, is what I'm hearing. And I think that's a really powerful tool. Becca, is there anything, I kind of just want to go to you if you want to chime in here on any of the thing either Matt or Michael have said.
I mean, how can I follow those two? I mean, seriously. No, I think that they hit everything. It's just, yeah, both of them very powerful. And I agree completely.
Excellent. Well, the next sort of question I have for you all, and Becca, I'm going to start with you. So, is what would a landscape of freedom look like to you? What does that look like to you?
So that's, again, a very interesting question and one I've been thinking about. So we were, at one point we were talking about, in a meeting, a couple of days ago, we were talking about, bigger movements of like the Civil War and, self-emancipation. But I was actually kind of thinking about smaller acts of freedom, and how we might be able to see those. So I was thinking about everything that we dig up at the overseer's site or at the home farm quarter. And I'm thinking of gullet stones in particular. So when we see gullet stones, we know that there were chickens there. And if there were chickens there, there's most likely eggs, and how eggs and other sorts of produce from the gardens around the quarters would have been not only a source of food for them, but it was also a means for making money. And with that money, there comes a freedom of choice to a certain extent. I mean, when we see the ceramics, the broken sherds of ceramics in the landscape, that was intentionally bought. They were free to buy that at the local, at the local general store off property. I think that there's a lot of power and, freedom in those really small acts of choice.
I think that's really important to think about the everyday actions of everyday people as we think about the past, because we're all part of that, contributing to it. Michael, I'm going to go to you, sort of the same question to you. What does a landscape of freedom look like to you?
Well, the landscape of freedom looked like to me, and I look at it through the eyes of my ancestors. I'm a descendant of Robert Ellis, one of the founding members of Freetown. And I like to always pose the question back, get some people things to think about. What's the difference between independence and emancipation? Because the 4th of July, we celebrate Independence Day. Were we emancipated from England and Britain, or were we independent of them? Versus in, January 1st, 1866, we were pseudo-emancipated. But even in that emancipation, there were a lot of small Black communities, African-American communities, who came up and were independent in its truest form from the larger populace. And that's kind of how I see freedom today, is really through that lens of independence. That there were communities in Thornhill, communities in Unionville, communities at Freetown, communities in Little Petersburg, and all over Orange County, pockets of little African communities that were independent of the greater population because of the laws of the land, because of Jim Crow segregation, because of segregation in general, because of how social relationships were viewed with a lot of African Americans. And I think Orange is probably a little more progressive than other areas, but there was a place where people were set in. You had to be in your place. And what I've seen from the ancestors that I've studied in my family and other families is that that place, they chose the place they wanted to be in. And it was never in a lower position because they understood the value of freedom, not just to fight for freedom, but to actually achieve it. And I think that was always the impetus for them, was to have a free area where they could be just as independent as those settlers were and those colonialists were in 1789 or in 1776 when they fought the British. Our ancestors desired and wanted the same level of freedom and the same type of freedom, nothing less than that. And to me, in Orange County, they fought for that for a long time and acquired it and found their freedom in the social structure they could find within Orange County. And, you know, as you know, the season approaches, I'm thankful for their service and their sacrifice to make sure that we had some semblance of a freedom that if we didn't understand it, we at least benefit from it.
I'm going to go to you again, because I'd love for you to expand a little bit about specifically how people in Orange County did fight for their freedom, because I think that's a story that doesn't get told a lot. So before I go to Matt, I would love for you to expand on that a little bit.
All right, well, Matt might not get a chance to go into this, okay? Well, how we fought for our freedom, and I'll take this back to around the 1700s. There was a young lady named Eve, an African woman, an enslaved African woman, who was the first Black woman to be arrested and tried for poisoning and found guilty in Orange County, Virginia. She poisoned a gentleman named Peter Montague, and she was burned at the stake on my birthday, or she either committed the poisoning on my birthday of August 19th, 1732. And to me, that's the first sign of resistance, that a lot of times when we're looking at resistance struggles, we're looking for large, massive movements. And a lot of times resistance was just very subtle amongst the Africans, where they learned how to poison you slowly or poison you quickly. And, you know, you might not have got everybody, but you got the one that you wanted to get. And they were able to do resistance that way. And the power at that point almost became in their hands, that they knew if you did them wrong, they could do you wrong. That there was going to be an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And as you go into further into the history of the war between the North and the South, the Civil War, roughly 107 or so formerly enslaved Africans left their plantations in Orange County and went to go fight on the Union side. And that's about 107 of about 209,145 Union soldiers that were documented. And then another 25% of the Union Navy, which made up of roughly about 22 to 25,000 individuals. So they were very much focused on their freedom. You figure in the North, the African American made up less than 1% of the Northern population, but they represented more than 10% of the Navy, more than 25% of the Navy, and about 10% of the Army. So they were very focused on this, and they were focused on two different fronts. You had one front that was focused on the Union side, and then there was a whole nother aspect of sabotage on the Confederate side. So one gentleman in particular from Culpeper, his name was William Jackson. William Jackson was a coach driver for Jefferson Davis. And these Africans had this unique way of speaking, and we hear it now, we call it slave speak. Yes, sir, massa. No, sir, massa. But they were really speaking Fulani. And there were code words in this Fulani, which made it sound like they were ignorant. So people said a lot of things around them because people assumed they were just dumb. They didn't know English. They couldn't, you know, they had this way about them, but they were very intelligent and they were able to eavesdrop. As the young people call it, ear hustling, right? You know, so we're out ear hustling, and while we're ear hustling, we're listening to the plans. But we're not only listening to the plans of the Confederacy, but also doing the plans of the Confederacy, because the Confederacy in their arrogancy as a army utilized body servants or enslaved Africans to do a lot of the work, thinking that we were too dumb to appreciate freedom. So a lot of the Civil War nuances happened around intelligence from these enslaved Africans who were working on either side. And I say either side because sometimes they gave intelligence to the Confederates to shift positions. If you recall, I believe in 1862, with General Butler, he had almost captured Richmond. He made it down to like Ashland, Virginia. And he got some bad intelligence about Quaker guns amongst the Confederates. And it shifted the course of the war because some level of intelligence understood that if the Union wins the war and there's no resolution around the ending of slavery, then we fought, this is for naught. So you want to get some bad intelligence until this turns around the other way. And the Civil War, as much as it's about great valiancy, is really about intelligence. The intelligence battles is what decided victories in a lot of places. And the Africans in this process were the key components of a lot of this intelligence, in which the BNI, Bureau of National Intelligence, or Bureau of Military Intelligence, was started, which was then the precursor to the CIA. And there were a lot of figures around Orange County who played a significant role in intelligence that was documented. And I'm quite sure this is based upon our people, that there was a whole lot more who were never documented, that they were able to keep a secret to the point that even to this day, 99% of Americans, Civil War scholars, are not even aware of a lot of this intelligence that went on.
Thank you so much. I think it's really important as we talk about and do these presentations to highlight, the local history here, the local components, the uniqueness that is Orange County in this Central Virginia area, and the role that people played in shaping the nation. I think so often we talk about how people like Madison or Jefferson in this area shaped the nation, and we forget to talk about all the work and all the intelligence of African and African Americans, and I think that's really essential. So Matt, I am going to go to you and ask you, what does a landscape of freedom look like to you?
Yeah, and while you were talking, Michael, enjoying what you were saying, and I was madly looking for this one picture, and it's not just because it's a picture of Mary when she started here at Montpelier, like almost a decade ago, but this is a site of freedom, and it's a site of a cabin of an enslaved family. And you would be like, why is that a site of freedom? And this is a site that was occupied from probably the 1820s up until sometime around August of 1863. And we know this because it's no longer occupied by the family in this 1860s. It's occupied by Civil War troops, Confederate troops that occupied Montpelier during the winter of 63 and 64. And what this means is that the family had left soon after, because if the house had been abandoned for 5 years, there wouldn't be a structure standing, because these structures would need to be upkeep, which means that the family escaped. And where they would have escaped to, more than likely, is Culpeper, which beginning in October of 1863 was occupied by the Union Army. And with the Emancipation Proclamation and the ability for, if you're an enslaved individuals, to make yourself essentially escape to Union lines and become property, contraband property of the United States, you were free from that individual owner. And so, families took this risk, and we were told, lies and horrible stories about what happened to them when they get to Union lines. And no matter how horrible that was, what was more horrible was living under enslavement, where your children could be sold or your family could be separated. And so this is, freedom and an expression of freedom of self, like Becca, you mentioned self-liberation, that is just so, patriotic. It is so American, and what in so many ways defined America is the ideas of liberty and the ideas of citizenship. And Professor Hassan Jeffries in a recent talk was talking about, who thinks more about, liberty and freedom? Those that are denied it. Not if you have it every day. If you get food every day, you don't think about food. But if you don't have food, you're thinking about food all the time. You don't have liberty, you're thinking about this. So the idea of what freedom is, and what emancipation is. Michael, you mentioned, enslaved people, enslaved Americans were looking for emancipation ways, a way out of no ways, from the first time people were enslaved. So, we talk about Juneteenth and celebration of emancipation. That's 250 years of, emancipation acts. And that was cumulative and made for some of the events we're seeing in the archaeology and the documentary record that we're celebrating today.
Yeah, and I know this came up when the three of us were having a little bit of a pre-conversation, but this idea that emancipation wasn't people waiting to have a document read to them to tell them they were free. It was these generations of people finding freedom through everyday acts, through joining military and major acts, through that intelligence, through that shaping of the landscape, the moving of their families, all of that work. And I think that's a really powerful thing. And I think what's really beautiful is we see that when, once you start to speak the language of the land of Orange County, you start to see it everywhere. So the next question I want to ask you all is, what should we be doing to make sure the next generation knows the importance of these landscapes and of these stories? So looked at a lot of the people on this, and many of them are my age or older. So we're all quite young. But what about that next generation? And I think in particular, right now, the education of our children and even our young people in colleges is a national topic of discussion. So what do we want young people to know about these stories and about these landscapes? And whoever wants to answer first can go. Or I'll call on you. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. I would say that these stories are ones that need to be told by descendants in terms of not just, passively telling them, but doing the research, being part of defining the questions that are being addressed towards the archaeological record, the documentary record, the plant record. That's where some of the richest sources of research is going to come from. And it's, that Becca, you mentioned the warp and the weft of I can't remember. I just love that it was history and the oral history and the landscape. And, so many times when, as a scholar that is not part of not sharing this with a descendant community, the stories the questions that are asked sometimes can be very sterile and sometimes very racist, and unintentionally or not, it doesn't matter. It breaks that warp of that story. And that's where finding ways to have descendants be part of this process is an incredible, it has some incredible yields, and to have it would be great to have a field. There's like anthropology is defined as like, one group studying another group. That's not, it's essentially what it was, that is not part of that group, but having a field of, that would really focus on this and focus on the, making those connections would be great. And I think it is. It's many ways, Africana studies and African Black studies. So I correct myself.
Excellent. Becca, what about you? What should we be doing to make sure the next generation knows the importance of these stories and these landscapes and knows them?
So kind of going off what Matt was saying, I think, having as much involvement by descendant communities in whatever capacity they're willing to contribute is so essential. It's so essential. And kind of doing the work that we're doing not to like pat myself or ourselves on the shoulder, but the work that we're doing at Montpelier, the fact that the Montpelier Foundation and the Montpelier Descendant Committee were able to fight for and achieve structural parity. The fact that we have such a diverse group of field school students working with us is just, I think it's phenomenal, because we're able to show how dynamic these lives of the lives of the enslaved individuals around, Montpelier and Orange in the free towns, how dynamic they were. And I think that there's power in understanding that, it wasn't all about, being enslaved. It was about creating family. It was about creating networks, connections. So yeah, I think the work that we're doing right now, I think it's essential.
Michael, same question to you. What should we be doing to make sure the next generation knows?
there's a lot that we need to do now to make sure this generation knows. And that's where it has to start, because it's a lot that we don't know. And being a descendant of two different sides of families from Orange County, as descendants, we had to put more value to our family history. Every aspect, the good, the bad, the ugly, the not talked about, all of those things are critical, because history should not be judged upon if it's good or bad. It should just be history. This is what happened, and this is what you should be learning from. So having more value put on our stories, our legacies, especially during the time of the enslavement period and the Jim Crow period. And we need more involvement from the larger white community to share some of their books, because a lot of us are looking for history that we can't get after 1865. After 1860, things get really murky for us, and it's hard to tell stories of people you don't know anything about. So this becomes, where community now has to come into play and say, okay, we have these books, we have these documents, how can we share them with you to make sure that you all have access to your stories? And then we need to do a better job of amplifying those stories and telling those stories, highlighting resistance, and that every act, every breath they breathe between, let's say, 1520 to 1865 were acts of resistance. Staying alive was an act of resistance. A lot of us wouldn't be here if certain ancestors had passed away, if they had fought to the death, that they saw a larger vision. So putting greater value on them, and then putting a greater respect on their names and their legacies. That, and even with this particular time period, there was an Emancipation Day in Orange County before there was Juneteenth. And that history is dying off. Ms. Edna Lewis spoke about it in a book. We had Emancipation Day and homecomings. This is Orange County history. And a lot of the people who have celebrated Emancipation Day are no longer with us in this realm. So being able to really not just wait for a federal holiday or national recognition of a day or event that doesn't necessarily fit the Orange County narrative. Juneteenth doesn't fit our narrative. That was specifically for Houston, for Texas, and maybe parts of Louisiana, but it doesn't fit our narrative. And even, as you were saying before, the narrative of us fighting for our freedom. We've got to recouch this, because the way, and I'll speak in generalizations, but how people can see our ancestors fight based upon the story that's been told has been soft and weak. That you didn't really fight. You waited for freedom as opposed to creating freedom. But there's a whole league of individuals, the Lincoln Law League or the Lincoln Legal League, who actively played the American country like a game of chess and moved pieces to and fro. To me, it's intrigued me so much. I mean, I talk about it all the time, because it amazes me. And the more I learn about it, and the more I learn about the role that citizens of Orange County or residents of Orange County played at that time, amazes me. It amazes me more, but to even explore how my family played a part, if they played a part. And, it could have been as simple as hanging clothes on a line, and sending codes that way, that putting a lot more respect on their contributions, on their actions, on their acts of resistance would help the next generation really appreciate what we have. Because I don't think we have a full understanding of all that happened. And because we don't have a full understanding of our generation, it's hard to help the next generation be inspired by it. I mean, I can speak for myself. How many of us were inspired when we were 15 to learn more about our history, these stories of people in Orange County? And Mary, I don't think you're from here. So you didn't even know Orange County, Virginia existed probably when you were 15. So these are all realities of reshaping and retelling our narrative. And right now, I mean, we have the power, the authority, and the least amount of resistance to tell all the stories we need to tell. But we also have individuals who are dying off who can help us tell and craft these stories. So there has to be a way of getting them, the elders with the younger people, to be involved in the story collection. That it can't be just doctor this or just doctor that. It has to be some of the younger people understudying with the doctors, with the professionals, to really make sure that when they're 40, they're 50, they had that experience of being able to collect that story from Miss Jackson or Miss Ellis or Miss Davenport, and holding that as a way to pass on to the next generation.
Thank you. You know, what's interesting is, you're right, I'm not from here, but after I moved to Orange County, my mother started doing some genealogical research and found out that my ancestors were in Orange County in the 1700s. And it's amazing sometimes how the ancestors call you back home to finish some work that maybe fix some mistakes that they made, or finish some work that they left undone. So
Totally agree. I'm back here because of the same reason.
So that really sets us up beautifully. What I did want to give you all an opportunity to do is, I know we have a lot of folks on this call that are local to Orange County, folks that are members of the descendant community, or folks that maybe not even know that they're a member of the descendant community, but feel some sort of connection to Orange County, to this place. How can they get involved in uncovering these stories, telling these stories, sharing these stories, the kinds of things that we talked about today? And Matt, I'm going to make you go first.
Okay, yeah. Well, as you might expect, it's through archaeology. You can obviously, many of y'all know you can join in the programs that we're doing, as participants on the dig site. And for descendants, what we're doing is right now, Becca and many of the people on the call, like Allison and I, we're all, and Mary, we're working on grants to find pathways to make descendant involvement a critical part of how we define the archaeology at Montpelier, and make it not, a research department or a public archaeology department, but a community archaeology department where the community has a way and pathways to do work. And Michael, what you were talking about with students, doing the research and creating pathways for careers, I think that's such an important way. I mean, to have a to be a student of, as a young person, a student of, whether it's agronomy or it's of ecological studies, but to learn those studies in the place that your ancestors created and built. I mean, you would have such an awe for developing the awe for the science of studying your ancestors and what they did combined, like the science, the chemistry, the biology, the archaeology, the history. That's a reconciliation between youth and their the ancestors, and that's our goal, is to really find ways to make these connections. And that's my last decade or two at Montpelier that I want to devote myself to, is making this community archaeology program truly work. And to be working for the MDC is so inspiring. I thank all of you all for this opportunity. Some exciting times ahead of us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Matt. Becca, is there a way that folks could get involved with oral histories? I'm sure there's people on this call that have a story to tell.
I sincerely hope so. So yes, please feel free to email me. I'll put my email in the chat for anybody who's willing to reach out to me. Now that we have Zoom, I can pretty much go anywhere and talk to anybody. But yeah, I would welcome any chance to be able to talk. Oh, thank you very much. I would welcome any chance to talk with any descendants about their family stories and anything relating to this wonderful area.
Thank you. And Michael, how can people get involved with what you do? I know you do so many cool programs out at your farm.
Come on by the farm. Check us out on social media, Instagram, anywhere, Carter Farms VA, Facebook, and Carter Family Farms. We would my nonprofit Agriculture would love to be able to have more research assistants assist us with researching both plants as well as people and stories. We feel definitely there's an intricate tie-in between the plants, the people, the practices, the principles of agriculture, and also the people. We have a Juneteenth event as well on June 17th at our farm. So you definitely can come out and participate in that. We'll have other events throughout the summer at the farm, as we always do every season. Yeah, and just email me, carterfarmsva@gmail.com. That's the best way to get in contact with me. We have a lot of different research partners we work with, Virginia Tech, American Climate Partners, American Farmland Trust, some other folks. And this season, we're working around the creation of not the creation of African vegetables, but the use of African vegetables with the health of African people. And it's called Eating for Your Ethnic Type. So trying to find the correlation between people of African descent and vegetables of African descent and how they will relate to our health and our nutrition as people of African descent. And if you want to be, I have a few people that's trying to be a research participant in terms of eating. So we'll take those, as well as those who will be interested in other forms of research, statistical analysis, analytical analysis, nutritional analysis, and this basic research around the plants in the Piedmont area. There are a lot of ancient nutrition here that we've kind of lost sight of and lost track of, and we need those stories told as well.
Amazing, thank you. I think what's been so powerful about this conversation is that, we started talking about lands and landscapes and stories of freedom and these ideas and how it's gone to everything from someone's diet to military service to all these things. It's such an all-encompassing type of idea. So I want to invite the audience now to raise their hand if they have any questions. You can raise your virtual hand or you can put some in the chat. We're starting to get some in the chat already. Diane Gibson asks, are genealogists being involved in any of these processes? So, who wants to take that?
So right now, no, but I would welcome any sort of official help. My gosh, because Diane, we talked about this last week. Yeah, any sort of resource to help, tell a more dynamic story is more than welcome.
Excellent. Danny Rivera also invites you all to come talk to her youth civic group over the summer. So to get involved with the young people locally in Orange. Do we have any other kind of questions from the audience? Look through to see if I see any. Here comes one. Annie Evans asks, or she says, we will soon be crowdsourcing resources and creating learning resources to support a newly adopted K-12 social studies standards for history, geography, civics, and economics. We welcome anyone who may have resources, knowledge to share, especially digital resources. So Annie is on the front lines of bringing really these kind of whole truth histories and multiple stories into public education and public schools in Virginia. So appreciate the call out there.
And Annie, we know each other. GIS, we have all our data in the cloud, online, publicly accessible. And if you ever, so much data that students can work with and play with. I play with it, so I love it.
Well, I think GIS is a really important thing to kind of touch in here because it's a way we understand spatial data. Basically, we're making all of these maps publicly accessible so people can see these spaces, these landscapes that we were talking about, and the historic resources, the archaeological resources, the environmental resources, the plants that are growing there, all of that on the landscape showing up. She says we fought hard to keep GIS in the standards, so good job. Thank you for doing that.
And I think that's, no, I'm sorry. I was saying that's another way to involve the youth. GIS, especially the use of drones and that type of information technology is critical to keep them involved and keep them engaged, not just in helping to create it, but helping them to sustain it and keep it going and keep them engaged in it. Utilizing a lot of this technology. As I was we were talking about probably beforehand on Thursday, I think, or whenever we talked. There's a lot of ancient technology that was used that could not even be discovered until the use of lasers today. Like the enslaved Africans were doing technology and creating technologies that we're just now discovering. It's like, oh my goodness, this is what you did. This is how you did it, with rudimentary tools, with no, you know, they didn't have any lasers, they didn't have the GIS, but their precision was pinpoint, excellent. When we did the Walk of the East Woods in the fall, the roads were so well put together that dump trucks could ride through them in the rain. I mean, it was like, this is incredible to have a road this well made in a forest. But the genius and the technological advancements of those individuals, those engineers, those cooks, those architects who just happen to be enslaved, has to be acknowledged and appreciated a lot more. A lot more respect has to be put on their names and their efforts.
Absolutely. And I love that you refer to those people as engineers and as architects, because so often we don't attribute, you know, those lofty career titles, even though the work and the knowledge was there by those enslaved people. And I think it's really important as we think about that the massive amount of information that was held in the minds and in the hearts of enslaved people, and how when we drive through Orange County, we look around, we can see evidence, whether we're walking through the woods, whether we're driving down the highways, whether we're looking at, you know, these monumental plantation mansions on the side of the road, and think about who built them and who did this work. We have just a few minutes left, but I want to give each of you an opportunity to kind of offer either a closing thought or statement. And if you don't have one right at the tip of your tongue, just one word that you want people to leave with here today too. So what is one word you want people to take home with you today, with them today? Matt, you got a word?
I do, but I'm struggling to keep it to one word. It's, you know, like, I think it, like, enslaved engineer, enslaved scientist, you know, to be a slave, that didn't exist. For the youth to know that their ancestors, their Black ancestors, were engineers that created something like that's above my shoulder. I got to point in the right direction here. You know, a stream that goes for a quarter mile in a straight line in the Virginia Piedmont, that is engineering. And that was done by Black hands, labor, but also the design of it was as well. So that's inspiration.
2 words are fine. Thank you.
Or 80.
What about you? What about you, Becca?
Yeah, I can't keep it to one word either. I'm sorry. But mine would be, you know, agitate, agitate, agitate. We need to disrupt, you know, the misconceptions that are out there. I mean, so something as simple as, well, not simple as, but language, the word slave, it's so simplistic for the depth of knowledge and creativity and struggle and everything about these individuals' lives. It's so simplistic. It doesn't do it justice. It doesn't do them justice. And we need to, like Michael, like Matt, like you, Mary, we're talking, we need to, you know, engage with the wider community outside academia and away from the doctors. Everybody has a piece of this puzzle. So yeah, agitate, agitate, agitate.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, Michael, final thoughts and maybe a final word or 3.
All right. It'll be more of a question at this point. Are we freed people or free people? And that's, you know, if you're freed people, who freed you and why? And if you're free, what are you doing about it? What are you doing with it and about it? That our ancestors were very much focused on becoming free, being free, and acting free. And that's freedom of movement, freedom of activity, and most importantly, freedom of thought. And we have the opportunity now to really exercise this freedom of thought and this freedom of achieving and striving for excellence, which is what this area was known for the last I don't know, 100-some years, especially in the Black community. The excellence was the order of the day. And I'm expecting that it's going to still be the order of the next couple of generations. So let's strive for excellence, and let's strive to make the cliche, this world a better place for you and for me. We are the world.
I was waiting for you to start singing there.
I know, I was about to, I had to restrain myself.
Well, I want to just take these last couple of minutes to thank you all for this amazing conversation today. Thank you all who took time out of your evening and away from your families to join us. I'll once again remind you that these conversations are going to continue every week, Thursday at 7 o'clock Eastern. And so much of what we talked about, I think, is really going to be picked up next week, where our conversation is called Stories from Our Grandmothers. So really tapping into the importance of family stories and having those conversations, those intergenerational conversations. So we'll be here again next Thursday, and we'll continue to do that. Again, we have our in-person celebrations the weekend of Juneteenth on the 17th and the 19th. And another program we have going on with the Art Center is actually a portrait contest, where two men who were enslaved and self-emancipated, we have written descriptions of what they would look like. And the Art Center is equipped with supplies and ready. You just have to go and ask for them, and you can paint a picture of what a young man named Anthony, who is 19 years old, looked like, and a young man named Ezekiel looked like. And we're really excited to bring in arts as we bring in the land, as we bring in this family stories, the research, the genealogy, the history, the archaeology, all together to celebrate these stories of freedom. So thank you again. And I hope to see you all here next week.
Thank you, Mary, for organizing this.
My pleasure. Bye, everyone.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Have a good evening.
Thank you.